So we- we've asked Greg Silver to give the invocation, please. Greg?
Fine, thank you. I will. My name is Greg Silver, and I'm a member of Kiwanis. I'm very happy to be a member, and I write stuff every week and on different topics. Today, can you see me all right? Can anyone see me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I had talked to, today's the last day of Passover. I'm going to give a little summary of what it means to those who everyone knows, but it kind of, and then a couple of symbols, and we'll go from there. Okay. The season of joy and celebration. This is with help of Rabbi Dennis Sasso of Indianapolis. Passover is our festival of memory when we remember and retell our ancestors' journey to freedom, and that's all of us. Memory is not about nostalgia, it's about aspiration and courage. We do not live in the past, we live with the past and envision and fashion the future. Every day when we do a Seder and close with the Seder, we say the words, Basham Hashad. Next year in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is both a place and an ideal, history and geography, a point of reference and a moral compass. Today is the last day of Passover, a 10-day festival, and I'll go over the plagues in a moment. But Jerusalem has been at the heart of our concern during very tumultuous times this year when Israelis have demonstrated to protect democracy and justice and the judiciary and peace, as embraced in prophetic tradition and Israel's Declaration of Independence. Passover's story of liberation, the Haggadah, which is the narrative about Seder, reminds us do not let happen. That did not happen just once. It happens every generation when we are called upon to protest and protect the freedoms we can easily take for granted, whether we are Jews, Americans, or citizens of the world. May the festival of Passover in the confluence with our Christian neighbors and of Holy Week and Easter and our Muslim friends and the Ramadan usher blessings of joy and health to family and friends, unity and harmony to our nation, freedom and peace to Jerusalem and all who love her, and prosperity and renewal of the world. Amen. So that's kind of my little invocation, and but I wanted to show you a couple things from Passover that we've been doing at our home. And we have what's called a plate, Haggadah plate of various symbols of Passover going back 2,000 years for many, many, many religions. We have a piece of matzah. This is matzah. Can you see that? It's a unleavened bread that was in the desert and is used today as tradition of what I'm going to talk about for a second. And we put it in a cover like this. Which is often hidden in the house for the kids to find, and it's kind of a little tradition that goes on. But I wanted to say that a couple of the things that I just showed you, and I didn't show you, we have on that plate a roasted bone, which is called the Pesach, and it recalls the lambs our ancestors sacrificed. We have that matzah, which we remind of how they had to leave Egypt. We have an egg, which talks about this springtime of fertility. And we also have an orange this year, an orange to symbolize that how women belong to this tradition of equality of people. And so lastly, I wanted to just give you the 10 plagues, which is the last one here. Is, and we always say Diana, which was that would be something that we were grateful for. God took us out of Egypt, punished the Egyptians and destroyed their idols, divided the sea and led us across the land, took care of us in the desert for 40 years, gave us Shabbat, brought us to Mount Sinai and gave us the Torah, which is law, brought us to the land of Israel and built a holy temple. And for those of us, all of that, we say thank you. So thank you for giving me a little chance to talk about something that we all celebrate. In fact, our family celebrated Easter and Passover together, and as a idea of being together and having the freedom that we do, and in the United States, and we have to always be diligent about that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate that. We'd like to welcome guests who are here today. Anyone from Eye of the Tiger Club? There we are. There's Guy. Guy is here in Utah. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. And now I'd like to thank everyone to take the time for submitting your spring dues. because they were due and you submitted them, so that's good. Roger Cummings asked that we share that the next monthly lunch brunch is at Iozo's is next Monday, the 17th, or this Monday, coming 17th. Great way to visit with Kiwanians if you're not able to come to the Thursday meetings. And also that Roger was just at the Shortridge Key Club yesterday. He's excited to report they are planning to offer inductions in a few weeks. Is Lou or Laura on the call? Maybe you have anything to share about that?
I'm on the call. I'll be at the induction. Is Roger not on the call today?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Laura, Laura,
go ahead.
it's Greg. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I was a member of Key Club at Shortridge. Could you let me know when that is? I might come.
Yes, it's in 2 weeks. It's April 26th, and they meet after school and then take an activities bus home at 7. So they meet from 4 to 7 when they meet, and they do activities. They eat. I think I'll plan to be there around 5. And
At the high school, right? At the high school.
at the high school. Yep.
I'll see if I can make it. Thank you.
That would be great. This club president is a freshman and really go-getter. Has organized a lot of students. I think you can see in that photo that was what I saw at their meeting after school, and they all participate. They all do things, and I think it's an exciting time for the Key Club. So
great.
Thank you, Laura. All right, next week, instead of the usual Thursday meeting, on Wednesday evening instead, we will be presenting Autumn Rucker of Pike High School with the Marion County Female Athlete Award. We'll have more sent out to you on that and the location and time, etc. The Indiana High School Sports Awards at Clues Hall, 7 to 8:30. We're sponsoring along with Colts, Pacers, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There are block complimentary tickets, and there's a link that'll be on the newsletter. So please look at your newsletter for next Wednesday evening instead of the Thursday noon meeting. On Thursday, the 27th, Graham's lined up the fantastic author for another Zoom meeting. Diana B. Enrique, who was the first reporter to interview Bernie Madoff after he was sent to prison and is featured in the Netflix documentaries. On May 11th, Thursday, we welcome Leonard Hoops from Visit Indiana. It's not only National Travel and Tourism Week, but also Indy Visits Centennial. It's one of the 5 oldest convention visitors bureaus in the country, so we all look forward to that. Jason Burke is looking for a new member to select the Lawrence and Mayselle East Scholarship recipients from Butler and University of Indianapolis, who demonstrate academic excellence, leadership, citizenship, and financial need. Jason says you'll be inspired by the applicants who are competing for these 2 scholarships. They embody the spirit which we as Kiwanians look forward in our fellow humans. Secondly, the time commitment is minimal. So there you go. So email the Kiwanis office if you're interested. The target date is early May. I'm not sure of the specific date, but it's coming up quickly. Just to keep you abreast, we have awarded $27,500 in community grants to 11 organizations this year. Thanks to Laura Berry, Nathan Ashworth, Mike Halstead, Trina Raudebush, Roger Cummings, Steve Farrow, and Eric Steele, who have been delivering these checks out to our foundation, from our foundation as the prize patrol. Later in the year, our grant recipients will visit us and give us an update on their programs. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Autumn Bones is the author of the book Unsolved Indiana: Murder Mysteries, Bizarre Deaths, and Unexplained Disappearances. Autumn's an Indiana native and freelance journalist who lives in Brown County with her family and, as we know, her chickens. She spends her free time researching newspaper archives, missing personnel national registries, and scouring state records to find unsolved cases in Indiana. Autumn, thank you for coming and visiting with us tonight or today. We look forward to your insight about all this least known and unsolved crimes. And for those of you who are interested, you can look for Unsolved Indiana. It can be found on Amazon if you'd like to order a copy. So, Autumn, take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate everybody being here. I'm going to pull up my notes here. All right. There we go. I had to move spots. I'm hoping now that I'm indoors, you guys won't have to hear my roosters as often crowing.
Mary, were you going to ask her some questions?
Sure. Are you ready? Okay.
Yeah,
so
sure.
You've obviously done a lot of research. What do you look for when you're selecting stories?
You know, I've written about more than 200 unsolved cases, and I think look at this, you guys. Now, I think that today is just, I'm having bad omens. My cats are now just all over the place. My roosters are outside crowing. I'm just having a heck of a time. Like I said, you know, having written about over 200 cases, it was extremely hard to narrow it down to only 35 for the book. I selected the ones that are featured in Unsolved Indiana for a lot of different reasons, but I had one common goal in mind with all of them, and that was preservation of the stories and remembrance of the victims. Let me just get rid of him. My goodness. Anyway, sorry. As an author, you know, I kind of see myself as not only a writer, but a historian of sorts. I prefer to tell the forgotten, so to speak, or lesser known stories rather than recounting, you know, some of the more recent or highly publicized ones that oftentimes dominate, you know, modern day media. I once heard a saying that kind of stuck with me, and it went, we die twice in this lifetime, once when we stop breathing and once when we are forgotten. And I think that Unsolved Indiana is kind of my way to not only ensure that the stories are preserved, but the victims of these stories are never forgotten.
Good point. Good point. Why do you think some of these crimes have never been solved? Do you think there are people out there who are just so good at it that they aren't caught, or what you're thinking behind this?
I don't think that there's very many of the genius perpetrators, but I think each case, especially cold cases, you know, they present their own set of unique challenges. One example being, you know, contaminated or misplaced evidence. You know, our procedures today for handling and storing evidence are far superior to those from long ago. When trying to solve the older cold cases, investigators, you know, they're faced with improperly stored evidence, lost documents, or entire missing case files. I think also a lack of police resources and manpower in general plays a role. You know, new cases almost always take priority, and unfortunately, there are always new cases.
Mm-hmm.
This leaves, you know, little time or funds or people, you know, to prioritize these cases. And instead, efforts are more focused on the current crimes that have a higher probability of being solved, you know, in a shorter amount of time.
Okay. One of your stories is Mercury and Old Lace. Lottie Lockman seems to be a nondescript little old lady. Could you tell us about this case, please?
This is one of my favorites as well, if you, like you said, if you can call it that. In 1947, this small town of Dupont, Indiana, made headlines across the United States after a series of suspicious local deaths were blamed on a well-known local housekeeper named Lottie Lockman. Now, prior to the accusations against Lottie, she was viewed as a, hardworking, caring, and devout woman, very humble. She had, lived through the Great Depression by, taking work wherever she could find it. Nothing was, below her. She, sold eggs, worked in feed mills, and for the good majority of her time, she acted as a housekeeper or a nurse to older or sickly residents around the area. She did all this while caring for her husband, who was also ill. She, like I said, she was seen as kind of a very good woman. And then in 1940, her husband passed away. And about 3 years after he passed, Lottie was hired by a local family, a wealthy family. A man named Forrest McConnell actually hired her to care for his wife, who was physically disabled, and his mother, who was chronically ill. Her name was Minnie. Before long, Lottie was a trusted member of the household. She ran everything there. But it very quickly after her arrival, the family, began to notice that the Minnie and Mamie, the wife and mother, were beginning to have violent fits of nausea, and they initially attributed this to, their failing health, and they didn't really think too much of it. In 1945, Minnie passed away. The mother, she passed away at the age of 79, and so again, she had been, chronically ill, and so it wasn't necessarily seen as suspicious, but it just so happened that about a year later, a little less than a year later, a sister-in-law of Mamie's came to visit her. And when she saw the condition she was in, she immediately said, I think that you're suffering from arsenic poisoning. You're showing all the signs that, that would be this. Now I'm worried that maybe something, is going on here. And eventually they kind of placed blame on Lottie, and this blame, was not out of nowhere. Mamie, she started to tell her family, Lottie is not the woman that everybody thinks she is. She runs this house, she doesn't run it, she domineers it, as she said. That's what she said. And she's like, I would not be surprised at all, if she was, doing something to us. So, Lottie was questioned, and about, all of this. And initially, she wasn't arrested, but about a month later she was, and she was charged with the attempted murder of Mamie after Mamie's blood results came back and revealed that she did not have arsenic in her blood, but 3 times the level of mercury that could kill somebody was found in her bloodstream. And so, after that blood test came back, they did arrest Lottie and charged her with the attempted murder. And now, while awaiting trial for this attempted murder charge, investigators started to kind of dig into Lottie's life, and they realized that several people had passed away while in Lottie's care. The first was a man named Wallace Lockman, Lottie's brother-in-law, who died in July 1935, I believe. Second was 70-year-old Hattie Calhoun. She was an elderly widow who, when she had passed away, she left Lottie several diamond rings and some cash in her will. The next was a 90-year-old man who everybody called Uncle Fred. He passed away in the summer of 1940, and he ended up leaving Lottie his home, actually. Later that same year, her husband Frank also died while in Lottie's care. All of the bodies were exhumed while Lottie was awaiting trial for the attempted murder, and they found in each case that all of the bodies contained high levels of mercury. So Lottie was then charged with the murder of Minnie McConnell. And her lawyer actually brought several doctors in to testify that, although mercury was present, that didn't prove that was necessarily what had killed them. And he also argued that many of the medications that all were known to take actually contained the element mercury. And so they could not prove that Lottie had, indeed done this, maliciously, even, maybe it just happened by administering the medicine. They eventually dropped the murder charges against her, and instead she went to trial for the attempted murder of Mamie. But, throughout the trial, she maintained her innocence, it said she would never do this. Her lawyers also mentioned that a search of her home and of the McConnell home revealed, no traces of mercury anywhere. They tested food and other things. They fully searched her house. They asked, had she purchased it from any local places, and they just really couldn't find any concrete evidence to convict her. About 14 hours, I believe it was, after closing arguments, the jury announced that they had reached a verdict of not guilty. Lottie's last words to the court were, "Truth always prevails." The press actually nicknamed the case Mercury and Old Lace in reference to arsenic and Old Lace. It's a 1944 film about a young man who discovers that his aunts who have raised him have been poisoning lonely old men. So that's kind of why the press dubbed it, Mercury and Old Lace.
Truth is stranger than fiction, isn't it?
It is.
Autumn, tell us about the oldest mystery in your book, and is it still an open case or was it solved?
Actually, the oldest case in my book is also my personal favorite case in the book. It is the story of Polly Barnett, otherwise known as the Wandering Widow of Southern Indiana. And it actually took place in the 1800s. Around 3 years ago, I began researching some of Indiana's urban legends in the hopes of learning about the true events that may have inspired them. The story of the Wandering Widow was one that I actually grew up hearing about. It was told to me as kind of a ghost story around the campfire of sorts. But in reality, after researching it, I learned that Polly's tale is a very sad one, a story of grief and loneliness and a mother's never-ending search for a missing daughter. I'll give you a brief summary of the case. Polly was actually born in Kentucky, but moved to Indiana at a very young age. She came from a semi-wealthy family. Around age 21, she married a man named Jim. They bought a small plot of land and they built a cabin, and they started a small farm on the land. Jim was a very successful hunter and trapper. So they started selling furs, and Polly started this giant herb garden. And so she sold herbs in town while he sold furs. They were, very successful and very well known and respected throughout the community. They eventually had 2 daughters together. Let's see. I think that's probably, I would say that's probably the last bit of happiness in Polly's life. Or at least for a while. Jim, a few years later, after they had, had their 2 daughters, he was called off to fight in the Civil War. And unfortunately, he returned home wounded. Not too long after his return, an infection set in and he passed away, leaving Polly a widow to care for the farm and her their 2 children. Eventually, though, Polly did remarry a man named Henry, who she had hired on as a farmhand to help her out around the farm. But again, her happiness didn't last long. Just before her eldest daughter's 18th birthday, she vanished. She had been working for a neighboring family at their farm during the week, and she would return home on the weekends. During one of these walks home, she just simply vanished. Um, Polly and Henry, of course, searched for her, but only a few months into their search, Henry actually contracted tuberculosis and passed away less than a month later, leaving Polly again a widow. Then, less than a year after Henry's death, the cabin that Polly had built with her first husband burned to the ground in an arson accident. Or not an accident, an arsonist burned it to the ground. But she was ultimately forced, to sell the land, in order to survive, to be able to pay for any food or anything. But after that, Polly's mental health, it seems, declined rather quickly. With her young daughter in tow, she started traveling across Indiana in this, never-ending search for her missing daughter. She was relying solely on the kindness of strangers who, would feed and house them for a few nights. And then around age 16, Polly's younger daughter actually died of exposure and malnutrition. She was buried in the town's local cemetery. However, just after the funeral, the caretaker of the cemetery discovered the daughter's plot had been dug up and her casket had been pried open and her body had been removed. They located Polly to, deliver this devastating news, only to find Polly completely covered in dirt. And well aware of this fact, she informed them that she didn't think that it was a proper place for her daughter to be buried, and that she had moved her someplace more quote unquote satisfactory. After that, Polly continued her search for her eldest daughter for nearly 30 years. She was seen walking in Greene, Brown, Owen, Monroe, Davies, Martin, it's Sullivan County, all of these counties very frequently. And they estimate that she's walked around 50,000 miles in her lifetime. Most locals were very quick to help Polly, but after years of, living the way she was forced to live, she was dressed in rags and infested with parasites. And eventually rumors kind of started to swirl in small towns, like they will, that she was dangerous, or that she would, kidnap children. And, some people were kind of mean, they would let kids throw things at her, or they would shoo her away with a broom. Yeah, but for the most part, I think that people were kind to her. She refused to stay any place long, even if a local was willing, to kind of take her in, because she just wanted to continue her search. About 5 years before Polly's death, she befriended a stray cat, a little black cat that she found. And according to everybody that knew her, this was her only friend. She would converse with the cat. She would, never be without the cat. If somebody would give her food, she would always split the ration evenly between herself and her cat. And the cat went with her to continue her journey to find her missing daughter. But in late 1889, Polly and her cat returned to Linton, their hometown, where she grew up for the most part, for the last time. And, her health was declining quickly. And a local woman agreed to take Polly and her cat in, care for her free of charge. And then in February of 1900, Polly passed away. On her deathbed, Polly's only request, her final request, was that her beloved cat be let go so it could continue the search on its own for Polly's missing daughter. And of course, the townspeople obliged and, set the cat loose. And according to locals, they never saw the cat again. The community placed a small box inside of the church for donations, and they erected a marker for Polly to be made. If you travel just north of Linton, Indiana, there is a place called Fairview Cemetery. and there is a limestone marker with a little stone cat perched atop of it, and it has a faded inscription that reads, "Here Polly Barnett is at rest from deepest grief and toilsome quest. Her cat, her only friend, remained with her until life's end." I think this is one of my favorite stories just because, like I said, I grew up hearing it, and it was really, fun and interesting to learn the actual story behind the myth, so to speak.
Mhm. Can you tell us of a crime that you think will be solved?
One that I think will be solved. I think that, I'm pretty confident in the box lady of Benton County. For those unfamiliar with the case, in 1976, a farmer in Benton County, Indiana, discovered a heavy cardboard box in a field he owned. Once opened, he discovered the body of a woman who remains unidentified to this day. A strange side note on this case actually is there's evidence to support a very unusual theory that the box may have been dropped via helicopter into the field. I thought that was strange. I'd never heard that in a case before. But the case was actually recently reopened in 2019, and the woman's body was exhumed for DNA testing. With all of the does that we've seen successfully identified recently, I think there's, a high probability the case will be solved using familial DNA in the very near future.
Okay, thank you. We're bombarded with murders and disappearances. Do you believe that these crimes have always happened, and we just didn't know about them, or is this a new genre of murder?
Oh no, oh definitely. I think these crimes have always happened. People no longer solely rely on, the morning newspaper or the local 5 p.m. news broadcast. Nowadays, we're privy to news from, all over the world. Like you said, we're bombarded by reports of assaults, murders, kidnappings, disappearances, and, updates about each case are now available in real time and on such a wide array of platforms. YouTube, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, all these platforms. I think the growing interest in true crime also plays a role in the sheer amount of crime stories we are now exposed to daily. News networks, for instance, capitalize on the public's interest in the topic. They know that these stories captivate viewers by allowing them to kind of dive into the darker side of humanity, from the safety of their own homes. Sorry, my cat again. And although there are some negative aspects, I think, to being overly exposed to these types of stories, I think there are also a lot of positives that have come from the increased interest and the increased exposure as well. Recently we've witnessed a huge increase in the number of cold cases being solved despite their age. Combined with the public's interest in the subject, this is presenting families of victims of cold cases with a renewed sense of hope that they too could finally see justice for their loved ones. But, it's also giving them the opportunity to bring exposure to the cases that have had none in recent years. With the public's help, they're able to garner support by doing things like, starting fundraisers to help with expenses related to the investigation, or simply, to spread awareness about the case to mass numbers of people via social media, in a way that just wasn't able to be done before.
Okay. Do you think that there are any trends or similarities among unsolved crimes, or is it just a lack of training on the detective's part?
I would say that there are a few, some commonalities between some of these crimes. For instance, several cases in the book involve, senior citizens. Seniors tend to be, more socially isolated. Oftentimes, they find themselves, physically disabled, or follow predictable behavioral patterns. This makes them, easy targets for criminals. I've also found that lifestyle choices play a formidable role in these cases. Many victims led what is considered a high-risk lifestyle, which includes runaways, hitchhikers, drug addicts, sex workers, anything that falls into that category. However, it isn't always a long-term risk taken, so to speak. Take, college students, for example. Most are experiencing their first real taste of freedom. And with that freedom comes some less than ideal situations as far as safety is concerned. Even if it's just a one-time thing of, walking back alone to the dorms after a night out with friends, that's a risk and elevates your chances of becoming a victim. So basically what I'm saying, the riskier choices lead to higher victimization risk.
Right. Autumn, tell us what is the strangest story that you've ever discovered?
The strangest story. I think this one's easy for me. I think that it would have to be the stories of Pearly Hogg and Nelson Dahl, otherwise known as the boy nobody missed and the puzzle of the pickle painter. It's the most bizarre to me because although they occurred years apart, they both occurred within the confines of one building. That being the now demolished old Muncie Central High School building. For those unfamiliar with the case, again, I'll share a short summary. Let's see, Pearlie's case. I believe it was December. I'm almost sure of that. December 1922. Pearly Hogg, 15-year-old sophomore at Central High School, vanished. After he didn't return home from school. He had a job after school, but after he didn't return home from his job, his aunt and uncle, whom he lived with, reported him missing. Police, obviously they searched everywhere for Pearly, and his aunt and uncle, exhausted their small savings, put in every effort trying to find him, but unfortunately they found no sign of him. 9.5 years later, 3 men doing repairs at the school Pearly had attended, Muncie Central High, they were working on a ventilation shaft when they discovered a pile of human bones at the bottom of it. Using items that they found at the crime scene, along with dental records, they were able to confirm the body did indeed belong to Pearly. Now, the shaft that Pearly was found in was accessible through 3 different floors of the school. The entrances to the shaft were located in each of the boys' bathrooms, in the rear of a small closet that was usually used to store brooms and mops, things like that. But students would oftentimes squeeze through the closets and stand at the top of the shaft to smoke cigarettes in between classes. Or they would climb down. There was a metal ladder in the shaft. They would climb down the metal ladder and they would sit in the bottom where there was a small, we'll call it a small room with a dirt floor and some pipes, but they'd sit down there and hang out. But in the end, Pearly's cause of death was never determined, and they never could figure out how his body could have laid undiscovered for so many years, given that, like I said, students used this shaft often. So, you'd think even the smell alone should have attracted some kind of attention, but somehow for 9.5 years he just laid unnoticed inside of the shaft, and nobody knows how he got there or why. And again, then the second story, the pickle painter, this happened in 1948. A man named Nelson Dahl, who was a Muncie local. He was a painter, and father of one, a husband. He told his wife that he couldn't sleep. He was, had insomnia. I'm going to go outside and get some fresh air. And he walked outside onto the front porch and then decided to go for a walk. And that was the last time he was ever seen alive. A few months prior to his disappearance, Nelson had been hit by a car. And so he had sustained a severe leg injury that left him unable to walk long distances. So when he was reported missing, obviously it would, it would stand to reason that he was somewhere nearby, that he couldn't have made it very far given his injury. But his family and the volunteers that helped search for him, they just found no sign of him. Around 10 days later, the staff at Central High School, they walked in and they found just a foul stench was permeating the classrooms and the halls. And they initially attributed it to the school's ventilation system had just been turned on for the first time that year. And so they thought maybe it was just, the smell was the machinery kicking on, all the old stale air was maybe flowing. But as the day wore on and the smell kind of worsened, the school's custodian made his way up to the roof of the school. Up on the roof, he opened a small hatch that led down to a roughly 3.5 foot tall attic space that was primarily used as kind of a buffer to, keep heat out in the summer and keep cool in, or keep cool in the summer, keep the winter out. But he climbed inside of this small space and discovered a set of decomposing human remains. They were quickly identified as belonging to Nelson, but no one could offer any logical explanation as to why Nelson would be in the school's attic. Or, adding to that, his leg injury, his family claimed there was just no possible way he could have scaled the roof, climbed down into this attic on his own. So they clearly thought foul play. Adding to their suspicions, Nelson was also found nude, and his wallet and a ring, his wedding ring, were also missing. But there was no obvious signs of trauma on Nelson's body. And the body was in such an extreme state of decomposition, it was nearly impossible to try to find a cause of death. They did do a toxicology report to see if maybe, he had overdosed, accidentally, or something, was hiding a drug habit or something along those lines. But again, the toxicology report came back clean, So in the end, they never found out, how he got into the attic, how he died, why he was up there. Adding to the bizarreness of that story, when the custodian who discovered his body was questioned by police, he actually informed them that on more than one occasion, he had looked up the shaft that led from the boiler room located in the school's basement, that led up to the roof. He looked up in there and would see a man looking down at him through the shaft, but he just kind of minded his own business about the whole thing and didn't want to get involved. And so I thought that, how strange is that? You possibly saw an unknown man hiding in the attic of a school, and you thought, well, best to just ignore that.
Each story gets more bizarre and more bizarre. Are you planning on writing another book?
I am. Unsolved Indiana is only the first in a planned series revolving around Indiana's lesser known unsolved crimes. I'm hoping to release the second edition of Unsolved Indiana later this year, probably in October or November, sometime around then, and like the first, it will feature, some of Indiana's lesser known unsolved mysteries.
This is just so interesting. I'm going to open it up for questions. I know Art has a question. So if you would unmute your screen here, and if you've got questions, Art's got a question. You looked into the 1978 Burger Chef murders of the 4 young employees in Speedway. There's been several theories about that case, but never an arrest.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was waiting for it. I thought somebody was going to ask something about.
Well, that was essentially my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've looked into it a little bit. I'm familiar with the case, so to speak. I think that it's been, covered a lot. And
Yeah.
like I said, I try to I try to focus more on the lesser known cases, the ones
Right.
that, don't already have, books and podcasts, and which is really hard to find nowadays. These podcasts and YouTubers and TikTokers, they're all over, finding these cases.
Yeah, I submitted that, I think, well, before you emphasize that you're focusing on lesser known cases, because that certainly in Indianapolis, that's a very famous case, but
Oh yeah.
it's, and every few years there's an article in the Stars saying, oh, they may have a lead or something, but nothing ever comes of it.
That's what I was going to say. I never get my hopes up in regards to, seeing that one solved, because like you said, every couple of years I will see, a new article or a new post that says, they've found a good suspect again, but it seems that nothing ever comes of, even if they do have a suspect, never ever comes of it. But it is one that I hope, to see solved soon or eventually.
Autumn, do you work with police departments in your research?
I do. Initially, I was very nervous to call a police department and ask them, because I know they're busy, and I didn't want to waste their time, so to speak. But eventually I broke through, the nerves of it, and most have been so excellent in, sending me additional case files, just anything that they have, especially, with these lesser known cases. I rely on, the newspaper archives and microfilms at libraries, but they just don't have everything. And sometimes they have very little. And so I have to rely on these police departments to kind of fill in the gaps, so to speak, from the information I do have. And most of them are very much willing to, oblige. I give, huge shout out to them, and also the county clerk's offices. They work very close with the police department, the sheriff's department. And, just recently I actually had a girl accompany me to the basement of our local county clerk's office in search of some letters that I was looking for. And she spent nearly 3 hours with me in the basement, searching through unlabeled boxes to find these letters. And we were successful in finding them. But while we were down there for the last hour, we had a sheriff arrive, and he actually spent time there helping us look for these missing letters, because he knew of the case, and he said it was one that he would love to see solved. And so it's one that will be in the next book, actually.
Interesting. Anyone else have any questions for Autumn?
Yeah, Autumn, I appreciate you joining us this afternoon. I've got a question. It's kind of a strange question, but it seems like this is a very general observation, but it seems like these stories, so many strange ones come out of your neck of the woods. And I'm talking, Southern Indiana, Bloomington, Nashville. Is there some parts of Indiana that tend to have these stories more than
You're
others?
not the first. You're not the first person to say, I think at this point, I've posted so many stories about Indiana, that's my main focus. I always see people, say, why is it always Indiana? And I don't think that we necessarily have, a higher crime rate, or a higher unsolved rate than other places. It's just, I particularly focus on these and bring out, not just the ones that you hear about every day, but these ones that nobody had ever heard of. I will say that I do think Southern Indiana is kind of a prime location, so to speak, for the disposal of murder victims. There's been so many that have been found out here. It's unbelievable. In the next book, I'll actually cover a little known serial killer who used Indiana as his dumping grounds to get rid of the bodies. But he would travel just across state lines to, Southern Indiana, and use the woods and, all the ruralness of this area to his advantage. And with these cases, if a body is left in the elements, obviously not just criminals know this, but I feel, it's obvious to say that, you're losing so much evidence every second that body, is outdoors. Aside from, weather, there's animals, just everything. They're exposed to everything. Valuable pieces of evidence are lost. And when, you're disposing of somebody, I'm sure that is something that they hope for. So while I don't think that Indiana in general is any more, crime riddled or has, any more unusual cases than any other place, I will say Southern Indiana, I think, is a prime location used by people with nefarious purposes to dump victims.
Mary, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Sure.
Summer, do you have a lot of cases where you're just frustrated, like you just can't get anywhere? Where I would think there would be limited information on so many that it would be like, oh, that goes nowhere.
I have an entire file that contains, I'd say, roughly 400 of those kinds of cases.
Wow.
It's they're all unsolved, to my knowledge. Unfortunately, for one reason or another, there just isn't enough information available to even begin to tell the story. Especially with these older ones, aside from, like I said, lost case files, misplaced evidence, things like that. Some of these cases, when they occurred, they just didn't, even at the time, they didn't have any real evidence or suspects or a motive, or there was nothing newspaper worthy, so to speak, and so they just kind of fell between the cracks. Or even worse, a lot of times somebody's status, so to speak, somebody in a rundown neighborhood gets murdered. Well, like I said, the high risk lifestyle thing too, lots of these cases I find, and they're so frustrating. I'm sitting there calling the police station, and they'll tell me, a lot of the police stations at this point are just familiar with me. They already know that I'm about to call and probably send them on some kind of mission that they are not super excited about, but always willing to help. But most of the time, they'll say, we'll look very hard, and they do. I'm sure they do, because like I said, they've supplied me with countless, times information that I would have never have found without them. But a lot of times they also come back and say, we can't even find a case file on this. We didn't even know that this unsolved case existed in our county, let alone give you a suspect name or even sometimes it's even less than that. It's, so and so disappeared, that, and nothing else about their life is available. They have, depending on the age, they might not even have, any family members left alive, to not only advocate for justice, but to, even tell the story anymore. And so, it's very, very frustrating to deal with those, but I don't give up easily. I've been told a few times that, well, that case, there's just nothing else to go on. And I'm like, well, hold on, let me try. I won't take no for an answer easily, although I will admit I've had to admit defeat a few times. And like I said, that's why I have a giant case file filled with all of these unsolved cases that I fear will never be solved due to lack of information.
Thank you.
Autumn, we want to thank you for being here. It was most interesting. And
Thank you so much for
to the
having me.
members here, if you're interested in her book, again, it's on Amazon, and it's called Unsolved Indiana: Murder Mysteries, Bizarre Deaths, and Unexplained Disappearances. And Nancy is holding it up for everyone to see the front cover.
Thank you, Nancy.
Autumn, a donation will be made in your honor to the New Shoe Day. They are a mission to uplift the world's well-being. This year, they plan to provide 2,500 new shoe days to Central Indiana youth in undersourced communities to empower them to move, play, and make friends like kids should.
I love that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. This was just very, very interesting, Autumn. We are so grateful that you took time to share your information with us. It's made us all think about things that we probably wouldn't think of anymore. And with that, everyone, we are adjourned. Have a great evening or weekend. And remember, next week's meeting is not on Thursday, it's Wednesday evening. So go to the website and get all the information. And everyone have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.